Hello and welcome to Tapas Pretzels, the adorsys podcast. Let's dive into today's episode. Hello, welcome to the Tapas Pretzels podcast with Tim, David, and myself as a moderator. And we also have a new guest, that is Jon Cooke. Hello, Jon Cooke.
Hi, everyone.
So you are a true expert in the field of data and technology, and you also have an impressive career. You were at companies such as Databricks, PwC UK, and GFT, and you are also now the CTO and founder of Dataception. So you talked about how do you prototype business change, or how is the typical business change in general right now? So what do you think is a new approach that could help to make this traditional business change a lot better? You talked about something like AI-driven digital twin. Is that right?
Yes.
So what do you want to tell us about that?
So it's fascinating. So my career over the last 30 years, I do a lot of basically business change analytics and data-driven business change consultancy. And one of the things I've always found is, it's fantastic. You get an idea, get a room with an idea with the business people, and you draw up your business process. You come up with some great new concepts, new ways of doing stuff. Then it becomes a lead time between actually converting those ideas into something that is tangible, like proving it out from a feasibility and value perspective. And then once you've done that, then putting it into production. And that process can take anywhere from 3 to 6 months, sometimes years, and sometimes not at all. And one of the things that business people always ask me is basically how quickly, how much cost, how quick you can prove this out. Because if I come up with a great idea, we have no idea if it's feasible, we have no idea if it's really valuable as well. And what you don't want to do is really to wait 12 months to be able to do that. And traditional business change, actually, you end up doing a lot of that. We've all seen the big innovation programs being spun up, where they spend 6 months coming up with some really interesting stuff. But then you get to the end of it, it's like, well, actually, has it proved the value? And even worse, if it has proved the value, it's like, how do we put this in production? Like, oh, we can't, or it's going to take 2 years and $20 million type stuff. So we come up with this idea of this kind of digital twin process. Obviously, digital twins has been around for a long time, but applying that to the data analytics consultancy process. So being able to actually prototype that business change process, that idea, with real data, with real analytics, and doing that really, really quickly. Now, we've been working on that for probably about 4 or 5 years. But what's really interesting now with the whole kind of generative AI, and we're doing a lot of AI projects in as well, like classic ML type stuff. But with generative AI, we can actually prototype that stuff really, really quickly. And we've done, example flows in like a couple of days with real data. And so what we're talking about is the digital twin process is actually, can we actually show what the process could look like with real data really quickly, really cheaply, and actually prove out that value and prove out that feasibility? Because if you can't join the data, and you don't want to wait 6 months to do it.
Can you give us one more concrete example that I can better understand it? Because so whenever I talk to people, they have some of clear understanding. They would like to offer this new service. They're thinking of an UI. This should be this way. So we're gonna get this data from the UI, and then we will have these dashboards, and the dashboards will look like this, and then basically you can steer our company towards but can you give us more a concrete example from your background?
Absolutely. So I've done quite a few posts on it, and one of the things we've been doing is actually trying to make it really easy to digest by using a character called Agent Dog, which is a caricature around actually going out on missions and actually defining business process. And we've done a kind of series on changing an insurance company. And the idea is that different aspects of there's claims, there's underwriting, there's risk. And one of the things we did was actually a risk process for them. So what we've done is basically we take a prompt and say, right, you are a claims underwriter, you're an insurance company for doing retail insurance. Define the risk process for doing that, for coming up with the risk factors, the metrics, that kind of stuff for a risk process for an insurance company. Use prompts, that kind of stuff, and our tooling, and it actually generates a bunch of risk models and a bunch of data transformations and an end-to-end process for doing that. Now, obviously, then we go in and go, right, is this correct? Can we change this around? Can we iterate it? But you get something very, very quickly around that. And then we start plugging in the data and saying, does that work? No, it doesn't. Put it in front of the business. We're also working on generating user interfaces and along that as well. And that's kind of very new. But the idea is we can actually take almost like the user experience approach, where you take wireframes we're doing that for analytics and using prompts and AI generation tool to actually generate those whole things. And so there's a post I've done around it, actually showing an end-to-end risk process for obviously quite a simple one, but for a use case. So that's the kind of process we're talking about. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so if I have understood well, what you do is to model the business, right? So
Exactly.
so how do you apply your framework? I'm going to suppose that you are using a framework or something
Yeah.
similar.
Yeah.
How can you apply your framework to a platform ecosystem, for example?
So we have two pieces to it. We have the actual process itself, which is something called a data product pyramid, which is something we've been built over the last 3 years. It's a way of distilling down business requirements into analytics components. You ask a question, what decision do you want to make? What outcome do you want to make? That's a decision product. What do you need to make that? Or we need a forecast, or we need a metric, or we need a kind of that side of stuff. And each one of those decision answers gives you a component. We can do that through the process. And with our tooling, we've actually implemented something that can support that. We have a bunch of templates. So, for instance, when we want a time series forecast, we want to do a historical metric. We want to do a cohort analysis, that type of stuff. And we train the LLM basically to understand that process and then bringing in its corpus of data. So, for instance, if it's a risk or if it's insurance or banking or whatever the use case, to apply that process and then generate metadata to actually create the business process. And our tooling interprets that metadata and actually builds the actual object graph. So it's a mixture of kind of the almost like a product management tool, an analytics infrastructure, and a data platform all rolled into one. And the thing that links them all together is something we talk a lot about, something called a data object graph, which is basically an executable graph with nodes, with executable nodes like machine learning models, like SQL, like that kind of stuff, which actually defines the business process, which is largely human readable and machine readable in there as well. And we've got a load of user interfaces where we can actually define and iterate on them. So it's not like we're deploying them as black box. We're deploying them into an IDE type environment, which we can show to the business people and then refine as we go.
In a quite interesting approach, I have multiple questions, but I started with the first one. Basically,
Sure.
How do you iterate? Because in the beginning, like you need to interview and iterate with the business people to understand what they're really looking for. How do you do that? What is your framework there? What is your approach there? Like, how do you really distill the relevant questions or thoughts or KPIs out of someone's head?
So that's a really, really good, important point and a really good question. So one of the things I've always found that if you go in with a blank sheet, say, what do you want? You get very little traction, right? So what the interesting thing, especially with LLMs, they actually, and the other thing I found is with business processes, and everyone said every business is different. It's like, well, the implementations are largely different between business space and the org structure. A lot of the business processes in particular sectors, especially like banking and other stuff, are actually quite similar. So you can actually go in with a pre-canned version of what they're looking like, or what the business process looks like. We've done this a number of times. So again, the risk process, I can build you a risk process. I can ask the LLM and also my knowledge. I'm an ex investment banking IT person, what that risk process looks like. So I know what the metrics are. And I can put an initial prototype and say, is this right? And then the business people go, oh, that's not right. Can we just change that? Can we just do that? If you go in with that, suddenly the light bulbs come on. It's not a blank sheet of paper. You can actually, people can transpose their own way of doing stuff onto that canvas, effectively, onto that image, and then we can iterate around. And I found that's really, really, really effective.
So basically, you have something like a starting point, and then you iterate it through, some iterations. And how long does it take in comparison, like to normal? What I said in the beginning, to normal traditional business changes in comparison to the AI-driven business change. So, do you have any examples for it, like for small or big companies?
Yeah. So we've got to think about transformation being 3 phases. There's the ideation phase, coming up with the ideas. There's the prototyping feasibility phase, and then there's kind of the productionization phase. We are at the moment concentrating on those first 2. And we can typically do that in a couple of days, those first 2 pieces. Sometimes getting data is a bit harder, so that can take maybe a week or 2, fundamentally, because obviously you'll unlock, extract stuff out of databases and all that sort of stuff. But typically we can do that in a number of weeks. We've done the transformation programs before, and I've seen them as well. That initial bit can take us 3 to 6 months, fundamentally, because you have to kind of come up with the ideas, you have to whiteboard stuff, and then you have to prototype it, and then you have to kind of do the cobble together all the kind of stuff. And that's typically 3 to 6 months for those 2 phases. We can do that in days to a few weeks. And I've even done a couple of POCs on AI, smaller ones in 2 days, end to end.
And which type of metrics we can get or one can expect from your framework when you apply your framework to a business? Which kind of metrics?
So there's 2 types. There's largely 2 types of metric, or 3 types of metrics actually. There's business metrics. So we would define those as part of the digital twin. So basically, the risk one, there'll be a bunch of risk metrics, loss given default, exposure at default, all that kind of stuff. Then there's kind of AI and driven metrics, so fundamentally, Sharpe ratios, all that kind of stuff. The ROC and basically how the models are doing fundamentally. And then there's obviously metrics around the sort of classic analytics metrics, which is like, give me my total cost of sales, all that type of stuff as well. So and sort of system metrics in there as well. So basically, how performant is the whole process running? And we can define all of those at the different levels. They are just metrics. Some of the we use data products as our kind of core unit. So a data product could be a metric. When we talk about data product, we talk about analytic components, actual genuine products that are business facing. So I could have a metric that basically says, give me my total cost of sales. That's a metric. But it's also got its own metrics saying, actually, here's some data quality metrics. Here's some, some trend metrics, some other things around that as well. The same for using machine learning model. There'll be machine learning metrics around that. There'll be drift, there'll be skew, all that type of stuff. And if there are business level metrics, we'll define them as well as part of the process.
Who would then be like, so coming from the initial thinking to the metric, like what would be the ideal customer for you? Well, is it usually like the management that's kind of like, hey, we have these KPIs, we need the processes before, or is it more like the product owner that wants to improve something? Like what's the typical customer on your side?
So the target for this is business people, fundamentally. It's about the initiative. Fundamentally, it's not about tech or, obviously if it's something like operations, we did a whole operational process, which we've done before, there'd be operations teams, but it's generally the business teams, which are the recipients of. Obviously we work with the AI and the data and the tech teams to actually implement, but the main recipient of this is a business owner. So we are talking about business change rather than, technology and AI and data change. There are changes that need to go alongside them, but it's all about, we start with the use cases. We start with the business initiatives, and they are really the business stakeholders.
So or David, do you want to go first? Or should I?
Sorry, I can just get a quick sip of water, apologies.
Yeah. So you said also like we have knowledge graph. Did I get it right? You said in the beginning you have knowledge graph in the middle as a cornerstone basically to implement everything. And how can you elaborate here more, like where do you use them, how do you use them, and how they provide you the value?
Yeah. So we actually use a derivation of a knowledge graph. It's actually called a data object graph. So knowledge graph typically has labeled nodes at the data at the nodes, and then obviously it has weights and stuff in between on the vertices. For us, we have a knowledge graph, but actually some of the nodes are actually executable nodes. So fundamentally, think about like something like a directed acyclical graph, like in a data processing thing. So like Databricks or what have you. It will define a set of tasks along a graph, and you basically walk the graph and you execute each of the tasks at the node. We do that, but actually the nodes themselves can be executable or could be a data node. So we might have a risk model at a node and say, right, here's our business process graph. Get to that node, execute that risk model, and then put the output of that as a data into the next node. So the next node becomes a data node in there as well. So as we've built a custom engine that allows us to walk those and actually decide what to do based if it's data or if it's an execution node. It was pioneered in banking, where you have these big dependency graphs. Like if you want to do pricing, for instance. So if you wanted to price a bunch of foreign exchange trades, for instance, you have a pricing model, which is generally in C++ or whatever, to actually price those out. But you have a load of dependencies on that, like an FX rate, so the GBP USD FX rate, for instance. What you can do is create a graph that way has the latest FX rate on the graph, and then the graph links to the pricing the pricing library through a classic graph price, and every time I change that FX rate, it then walks the graph and executes the price on the library. We've taken that and actually expanded out to say actually those nodes they're not just libraries. They could be calling out to web services. They could be calling out to, machine learning algorithms. They could be running SQL, for instance. You actually have a SQL node which will talk to a database and brings back. So we call it's actually a hybrid execution data graph, if you like, and we've called it a data object graph, which is because it's very like in object orientation. If you've got your class diagrams, basically inside the compiler, it generates an object graph inside. So each object in there links to another object, and it has a state in it, which has properties on it, and it also has methods that you can execute on it. So we've taken exactly that and brought it into the data space.
Is this comparable to a business process engine in that case? Like
it's closer, yeah. It's closer to a business process engine than it is to a kind of knowledge graph, yeah.
Interesting. And also define workflows and so on, right?
So yeah, I mean, it's yes. So more, it's a flow where you can have interactions with people and also interactions with components like REST APIs and that kind of stuff, and you have data in there as well. So yeah, it's elevating about that.
Very nice.
But then to imagine that, I haven't used the tool before. So, but can I imagine like that really people from the business side sitting in front of the tool and constantly model, optimize, and rerun the flows and redesigning it? Or is it like just for ideation phase and then handing it over to some engineering teams?
So that's very interesting. Prior to this, we did have it as a very engineering focused kind of tool to be able to do that. We're now creating a load of intermediate markup tools where you can actually write it in like markup language. So, use the AI to generate it initially and then to refine it and then productionize that. And then when you come back a bit later on, you can use the markup and change it, just adjust it very quickly. And then it will generate user interfaces, the bit we're building at the moment, to give the business a real kind of visualization of what the changes actually are around that. So you would have someone more technical driving the markup, but you've got a business person looking, again, it's that kind of UX type wireframe approach around that you can actually adjust and actually iterate very, very quickly and visually.
That's quite interesting. I'm just thinking of like, for me, just an enterprise word is basically a number of applications and informations flowing into an application, aka function, and then it's an output of a function. And if you really can track the information objects before and after, it's really easy to replace the functions as well. Like, and so basically, yeah. And there you too might be really hands-on, and a helping hand. So.
Yes. So one of the things we talk about, we're about to do a piece of work where we're looking at an existing estate, and we're actually carving out the data that's required for that new business process. They wanted to learn new use cases. And we call it the strangler pattern, which is actually a classic kind of enterprise integration pattern where you basically had exactly what you talked about, Tim, where you've got these tight integrations into kind of native systems, your big ERP systems, stuff. What we're doing is actually putting almost like a service facade on it, taking the data out that we need, abstracting it away, and then you can do exactly what you want, exactly what you said. Actually take it out and actually put it, substitute it in, and the back end systems and stuff. So as I say, it's something we've done a few times before. It's called the strangler fig pattern to give it its full title, because that's what strangler figs do. They go into a tree and they basically go around it and they eat away at the tree until the tree there's nothing left, and that's the same sort of process. Yeah.
So then, sorry for taking all the questions, but then basically you having something which is also quite closely related to API management concepts, isn't it?
Yes.
Like.
Yes. Yeah. So we have our infrastructure is completely microservices or services based. And we have a virtualization solution in there as well. So we can probe into the estate, and we can wrap the data required in a microservice and expose northbound in the interface just the data required. And we can have a kind of almost like a semantic layer across those. So you can say we've got 15 systems. We take the bits of data we want out, expose just the data on the microservice through the API, and then join it through on the graph. So basically, the graph doesn't know what the systems are; it knows what data it needs, but they're use case by use case. So we're also building these kind of reusable components in there as well, fundamentally. So like the risk model, for instance, might be used, deployed as a microservice on Docker. And that risk service might be needed for, a bunch of other different processes. We come and do, can you just do this other process? Like, oh, let's try and reuse some of the things we've already done in the previous processes, try and reuse the data. And if we can't reuse the data, then we can do versioning and all that kind of stuff. But the whole concept is really the sort of composable enterprises. You're building out Lego blocks of all the functionality and data that you need, but you're doing it on a use case by use case basis and doing it iteratively and accelerated with AI.
So for example, if you would able to map a fintech ecosystem, you with your thing, you can see how the data flows are going. Well,
yeah,
so
but
you can even optimize that data flows.
Exactly right. But it's not just the data. The interesting is not just the data flows, because I talk about not just data lineage, but analytics lineage, because you've got the actual components mapped as part of your flow. You can actually see what that risk model's doing. You can actually see what that decision model's doing. You can actually see what that ERP system's doing. So it's not just the data, because you've actually building the components in as well. So you actually it's closer to business flow. Obviously, where you've got a big ERP system like SAP. You are at the data level because you don't know what's going on under the covers, but the way where you have got components which you've built, that's there. So it goes beyond actually just the data lineage and data flows around that. And again with the digital twin process, you can start optimizing actually. Do we really need a big finance system here? Can we just take out the bits for that piece? Do we need a big marketing system? We're only using 2% of it. Let's build a twin that actually just does email, automated emails.
Mm-hmm.
Let's just take that bit and model that. We just take the data from here, and here. Model that. Actually, we don't need our marketing system. Obviously, I'm being very, you wouldn't normally do that, but it's exactly that. The point is that you can actually prototype stuff really, really quickly with the real data and see the more of the business flow than just the data flow.
So you can fine tune a business model.
Absolutely right. Yes, yeah, and you can adapt. And that's the other thing about it. When business, business at the moment, the market is. Wow, I've been in the industry 30 years and I've not really known it this volatile. Things happen, right? And you want to be able to try stuff out and talk a lot about kind of, this adaptability, this agility in business. People always talk about it at the board level. The rest of the organizations struggle to do that. With this, you actually can achieve it. As long as there's buy from the board and the exec, you can actually do it. Yeah.
It's really, I think it's quite crucial because what we really need is something where business people can really be independent from IT side, explore the capabilities and really define it according to their needs. One final question, which might open up a new topic, but how do you position yourselves in an agentic world? Because I think agents are literally quite comparable once they have come more adoption, but how do you see that?
Yeah, so I've done a few posts about sort of agentic, and I talk about there's sort of two kind of flavors of AI-driven transformation. There's pure agentic, which is basically where you build out your agentic models, where you have goal orientation and reward mechanisms, and you use LLMs and other probabilistic methods to actually get to that goal. That's very, very pure agentic. And then you have the AI-driven model, which is much more what we do, which is basically what I call agents on rails. So basically, you can use agentic stuff at the start of it to be able to actually generate those initial business processes. But in a lot of cases, people are finding that with the pure agentic model, that probabilistic nature is actually a problem, where you have highly deterministic business processes like KYC or regulatory type stuff. The pure agentic models actually can fail because every time you execute the agent for doing that piece, it comes up with a different plan based on this, and that can be quite tricky. But sometimes that works and it's brilliant. But there's sometimes actually you need to do it. And there's a company called Pasha who actually did a really good blog, and I've published that a few times, where they've actually tried agentic stuff in highly regulated, and it didn't work because of that probabilistic nature. So if you go to the kind of the deterministic world, but you actually use agentic methods, and that kind of what we do is actually use that kind of goal orientation, that kind of shared memory space, all that sort of stuff, to generate the initial models, but then actually all the plans, convert those into data object graphs, and then you've got the predictability. You actually get the best of both worlds. You lose a little bit something on the agility, that's true, but you get that predictability around that. So, we obviously work with we're working with a couple of partners on who work with pure agentic, and that's brilliant and it works really well. We're actually more concentrating on that kind of that second bit, that sort of AI accelerated business process.
Another great example for I have a hammer, everything must be a nail. That's currently.
Do you know this is probably the biggest learning of the last 30 years of me doing transforming hundreds of companies. It's about having the toolkit and knowing when to apply what. And everyone's talking about LLM stuff. Like, well, could I do a SQL-based metric? Yeah, I'll do that. And it's really kind of driving what we're doing. It's right. We have a number of templates, a number of components, and we use the right tool for the job. We accelerate gluing them together with AI, which is great, but sometimes it's the right tool for the job and what's most appropriate. So yeah.
So it's all about variability and some components to put in together. And so, yeah, thank you, Jon. It was a really interesting topic for today. And thank you also, David, and thank you, Tim. And we will see us at the next podcast. Just follow us on Spotify and also LinkedIn. And yeah, so thank you very much.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been a great discussion, great questions.
Thank you all.
Thank you very much.
Cheers.
So thank you. Bye.